supposed to be leading this, and he's not joined yet. So I think he's perhaps overrunning on another meeting. So if I just open up with some thoughts, this isn't the first meeting that we've had on PFI and PPP, but we're really now looking for this to be a working group that runs for a period. So just to explain the way we work for anybody that hasn't been involved, we have working groups. Now the working groups are permanent, and they meet maybe once a quarter or something like that to determine what information we actually need and how we can effect process improvement. We then have from that, so that we don't end up with the working groups getting into much of the detail, we have work streams where the work streams take on tasks, and they're task and finish groups where maybe a dozen or so people break off to tackle a particular issue. So, for example, in the PFI world, it might be something like room data sheets. So the management of room data sheets is something that I think is a pretty common problem with established PFI contracts as to how you manage that and how you keep it up to date and how it doesn't become a stick that you're beaten with. So that's an area. Another one is life cycle costing. Hi Matt, I see that you're with us. Great. I'm relieved because I was thinking that I might have to carry it on my own. But the principle here is that the working group decides what's important, and then the work streams actually are task and finish that hopefully in maybe 2 or 3 meetings we can actually come up with some solutions. Does that make sense to everybody? This is we've done this model successfully within BIM for housing for about 4 years now, and it really does work because it means that we're bringing together people that have got specialist passions that can make something happen, but then we can then create something that everybody can use. So, for example, one of the things that we're doing a lot of work at the moment on is fire safety and building safety. And we've got workshops coming up in 2 weeks' time about the safety critical assets and what information do you need about those? How is that information best provided? And how do you keep it up to date? So by concentrating on, for example, the information that's needed for Regulation 38, both in terms of new build and also maintenance works, it means that we've got a firm basis on which to work, which we can perhaps take a look at shortly. But I'll share with you, or Richard, can we share with people the dates for the safety critical assets? We've got things like fire dampers and fire doors and things like that, and they're in different groups. Okay.
The dates are 24th and 25th.
Sorry, Jess?
Yeah, the dates are 24th and 25th of September.
Yeah, 24th and 25th of September. So we'll share those dates with you. I think Nick's from Harmony. They've got some very cool new technology for fire doors. So that might be something that you want to join in on, Nick. Okay.
Sounds perfect, yeah.
So I've just got a couple of slides that I wanted to just open up with, and then Matt, if you've got some things that you want to propose, you can get ready for that. So what this is obviously the working group, and then the sort of topics that certainly I think are worth us considering at the moment are these, but I'd very much like your feedback to see if I've missed something or whether you think that what I'm suggesting here isn't so relevant. PFI handback is obviously a very topical thing. There are PFIs that are coming up to completion now that are going to be handed back next year, and that's very, very short notice, and people are trying to, I know, frantically to make sure that they're in place. But I think if we can look at ones that are maybe 5 years out or something like that, then there's ways of really much more cost effectively gathering together the base information that's needed to ensure that there's less tension at the end when that actually happens. Part of that is the most effective way of creating a baseline. So the baseline of where you are at the moment as to where you are or where you started, so that you can pick up that comparison, and then again, as I say, progressively pick up information that needs to be collected along the way. That includes variation management. So what's the best methodology of being able to track variations, record that those things have happened, and then be able to use that as evidence going forward that works have been completed. And for those people that haven't been involved closely in PFI, certainly the impression that I have is that unless you can actually provide records that things have been done, they can be considered not to have been done at all. And that's where penalties kick in. I think, I'd be so that's something that I think is a useful thing from our wider regulatory environment. Everybody's now trying to get to grips with. The PFI teams have had to do this for years. So I think there's stuff that we can learn from the better practice in PFIs for actually recording what's been done and then being able to evidence that. Life cycle planning, finding the best way of being able to make those projections, because that clearly is one of the main things that is driving the pot. And the other question is who actually controls that life cycle pot when things are being replaced, for example. So I'm going to step back from going any further on that because I'm way out my depth. But Matt certainly has got a lot of knowledge in that area. Because obviously what we're trying to do in BIM and asset management is look at the best and most cost-effective ways of capturing what asset information you have, and there's an interest in obviously using scan to BIM to be able to generate that, but the jury's out as to how well that is actually going to work, because in reality what you've got is scan to 3D, and obviously you can only do that on things that you can see. So you're not able to, for example, see where the compartment walls are. So it needs to be a bit more strategic than that. You can't just outsource the risk to a survey firm to generate that for you. And what we've been doing is using 360s to create asset data from those 360s, which is certainly a very practical way of doing that. And we've been doing that as active plan for the last 4 or 5 years with Sodexo, and we're gaining quite a lot of traction on that. The other big topic, I think, is in particular for companies like Resolus, who are probably going to be involved perhaps when new PFI or PPP projects come out, the likelihood is that there is going to be more PPPs in some form. And how can we work to try and get them right this time, so that some of the risk that I think a lot of people are exposed to can be resolved, can be addressed. And that comes down to the way the Cabinet Office sets a lot of these things up, I think, a lot of the finance. So one of the other things I wanted to share with you is that there's an alliance of organisations that are responsible for classification, which are bringing together a range of different classifications. And what we've got are Uniclass, NRM, and SFG20. So whereas normally those are not particularly well aligned, there's work that's been going on over the last probably 3 years I've been involved in it to try and align these things. So what we're now looking to do is to get that as a baseline for people to be able to work to, and then tie that back in with, for example, the BIM standards for being able to capture information. Also make sure that it's appropriate in terms of interoperability. So that's the IFC side, and COBie for capturing the asset information, but also being able to align it with things like ETIM, which is that's the standard that the wholesalers and merchants use. So not everybody understands that there's all these different standards that have been put together for different purposes to be able to manage that through. And also there's a standard for big barcodes, which is the international standard that is prominent in all retailers, called GS1. So that's coming down to product information. So all of this is going on at the moment, and what we're interested in is being able to leverage that, and importantly get the working group to not drive into any of the detail on this, but just be able to understand that it's there, it's coming through, and how can we best take advantage of it. And then what Matt and I have been discussing is being able to align with government standards for how asset information is actually being structured. So at a property level, there's GovS 004, and then the new facilities management standard for asset data, FMSO 002. This is, if we can stick to this type of standardization, it means that we've got more plug and play, so that if, for example, you need to swap out from one software application to another, it doesn't really matter too much, because your data is in a standardized format. So, for example, these are the recommended. It may sound daft that people have got to standardize the way they describe floors, but I can assure you on projects, on the same project, we get different people using different ways of describing even the floors. Also, in terms of asset data, being able to define in a proper way the relationship between assets and systems, so that we can then find the information that's needed, and the same with the locations. So I'm going to stop there and just ask for can we have sort of 5-10 minutes or so of discussion around that, and then I'll perhaps ask Matt to pick up and drill into a bit more of the detail. Do you think we're on the right track?
George, yes, I think that there's a requirement for PFI, whatever work we do now, to be able to be developed into the next generation of whatever is happening from public facilities. And I think the important part is making sure that there's a standard that's workable. Now, my past experience was in the Middle East, it's insane. You got 58 different consultants, and every single one of them is on a different standard.
Yeah.
So when you take ISO 19650, all of a sudden you get a little bit more alignment, but there's a language problem, not the spoken language, but the terminologies. And I think that when you come to the asset side is also very, very important, like classification. It bridges many, many little chasms of misunderstanding because it's better defined. Just my thoughts.
Thank you, Pierre. Anybody else? Caroline, you've obviously been working on the healthcare PFI project. I know that the asset data side of things has been a challenge for you. What's your sorts of thoughts on this?
Excuse my voice. Firstly, I'm recovering from a cold. No, but it's okay. I've had a very interesting journey with the PFI, and I agree with what you say. It's something that we, speaking for our particular project, it's something that I think, and lifespan of our project. So the project has gone on for 20 years. And in the 20 years that it's gone on for, it's seen a lot of turnover of leaders. And it's understanding, it's the loss of understanding that we're on a PFI that has happened on here, or understanding what a PFI is all about. And because during that time, extensions have happened, and there's been a loss as well in communication of what was discussed in the extension, to communicate it down to the engineer of what we are now expected to do. Because the other obstacle we've also met is that it's a national contract. So communication has just not been there, and to tell people and to reiterate that we're on a PFI. We're now coming to the end of it. And as always, we're now in a big panic because we're in the final year of the PFI. So we've exhausted our extensions, and it goes back out in the market next year. So asset-wise and asset collation now has become the main focus, because it's all about what assets have we got, what were we supposed to do. So now everybody's dusting the contract document and trying to read that contract document, because suddenly we realize we're a PFI and we've not maintained, and penalties are coming. So the understanding is now being driven by finance.
Yes.
Instead of us, the operational team driving it, we're now getting it from finance. And because finance doesn't understand, no disrespect, the operational side of it, and what we are maintaining the assets to, they're just looking at the figure work. So there's that confusion now. And I think there needs to be, I don't know how to drive that understanding, but I mean, this is a good start to drive that understanding of what is a PFI to people, to contracts, and to continuously remind us on these contracts, on these projects, on these accounts, that we're a PFI, guys, we're a PFI. We must maintain to this. And from our project, just on as the last thing, I think it's also been ignorance of the contract document. That has been a big thing, that making it bedtime reading, as sad as it is, but we needed to make it bedtime reading seriously, because we're now trying to open the document and dissect it, and yeah, there's a lot of gaps in it.
I think those gaps are really quite important to identify, because one of the things that the whole philosophy, I was around when PFI started, and the concept of it, I think, was very sound, and that was that people would be working collaboratively to deliver something that had a performance outcome. And then when the construction industry got hold of it, what we actually did was break it out into work packages and create the silos that we were trying to overcome in the first place, which I think is a shame, because I think that's a missed opportunity. So if everybody's got that common sort of perspective, then a lot of the cost that gets driven into the process, unnecessary cost, where people are trying to just protect their particular element, is overcome. So I think certainly we can't change the way things have been done retrospectively, but I think if we've got better quality of information, then at least we can present the information back in the way that maybe can take away some of those confusions. Hamza.
Yes, hi. So I have just I've just started on the PFI contract at Equans, and one of the major discussions that we keep on having from time to time is the handback and the handover of the contract. And the major concern that I feel in this is the different standards that each organization has, from the SPV to the council to the contractors and to the subcontractors as well. And when we see it as delivering from a contractor's perspective to this back to the school at the end of the contract, that those different standards need to be unified. So for example, the naming from Uniclass, that if that helps us, because each organization will look at it in a different way. Each organization will have their own registration of words. So, and right now, even while working with variation and life cycle, the coordination that happens, if we have a standardized system like the Uniclass in different aspects. So for example, even in asset management, that's a major problem. Every different organizations look at asset in a different way. They've got their own way of registering those assets. If one organization is using BIM 360, the other would be using a different format to register the asset in their list. So how do we bridge that gap, that single line, the single line of thought? That's something that I think that would be a good discussion point for us.
Yes, most definitely. Yeah.
George, very quickly, I think there's a very strong need for AI to be involved in unpicking past contract documents, looking at what's going to be delivered and seeing where the gaps are. And that becomes part of the predictive stuff, setting up the new contracts in future. And I think that that's a well worthwhile exercise, because it says, beware of the following items. These are where there are going to be problems and how they might be addressed. So it's, in a way, it's just getting a bit more predictive using AI.
And from that perspective, AI is dumb until it's been given the rules to look at. Do you have a suggestion as to how you would provide the training that wouldn't be needed to do that?
So part of that would be to take the standard document that you've got now, which is the current one, pull out some of the examples of what was previously set up 25 years ago. And if there've been variations in between, to start grabbing some of those that are maybe of more significance. Those then become the building blocks towards where we're going now, which is the target of a pure system down the end where we are now.
Okay. So that's an interesting suggestion. Is that something that from a team perspective, is there anybody that would be interested in looking at the contractual side of things? If you're interested in that, sorry, Matt, just to capture people at the moment, I'll hand over to you in a second. If you're interested in getting involved in the, I think there are two suggestions there that have come out. One is looking at the contracts to see what clauses and things have changed. So if you're interested in that, just put into the chat contracts. And if you're interested in what Hamza's just been talking about there, which is the classification and the standards, I think just put standards into the chat, and we can then come back to you and then maybe hook something together, because it's likely that you'll perhaps, like, and for example, you may have people within Resilice who are interested, that, you know, maybe specialize in some of these things, that we could draw them into. Yeah, Matt, sorry, let me hand over to you.
Sorry, I was just putting my hand up on the AI stuff. I'll just say, Pierre, I'm actually building a machine at the minute specifically for offline AI, so that it can take on contracts and stuff completely in its own domain. So there's no risks of confidentiality. So I'm actually doing that using Llama. So that's a work in progress. So I just wanted to, that's why I was putting my hand up. So it's just it's something I'm working on as well at the minute.
Is that something that you'd be willing to share with the contracts group then, Matt?
Yeah, once it's up and running, because it's going to be a little expensive beast, but it's going to be very data driven, where it can take ridiculous amounts of data, so it can review, revise, understand, and then feeding it as well with outcomes from things like legal proceedings and reports from different entities, so it can understand the impacts and the positive side of it as well. So it'll be a complex machine, but I want to keep it offline for the obvious reasons that it's got a lot of sensitive information in it. But that's a work in progress. But yeah, happy to share it, and happy to share how to build one.
So Matt's leading this working group, so that's great news. Thank you, Matt.
Okay. So one of the things I want, because we're covering a lot of points around the issues on the actual PFIs, PPPs. Do recommend having a read of the Fraser White report as well, because there's been stuff that are sort of, you'll see threads in it that will make sense, in the sense of you're not in a silo, because the stuff that we'll be talking about is very common. You know, it's just the fact we're all dealing with it from different angles, different perspectives, but the problems are there across the board. Because the thing is, a bit like the handback issues, a lot of the stuff we're dealing with is legacy stuff from a lot of the contracts initially being commercially driven and profit driven, and now being reversed to trying to avoid penalties and legal fees. So there's been a lot of early profits that are impacting the handbacks, and that's something that's important, because if it was managed earlier, it would be easier. So the longer you've got on a handback period, the better it is. The shorter it is, the likeliness you're going to get hit with some heavy penalties as you start getting auditors coming in on behalf of others that are going to find all the stuff that's been signed off and left alone for years that is in contract, but nobody's sort of been checking it, which is why things like fire compartmentation, fire doors, containments, all that sort of stuff that's legislation is often missing, because it's expensive. People are supposed to do it from build and often never do it, and then never want to look at it because there's admittance they haven't done it. So those are very high, just a few high risk areas on there. So I do think if you're in PFI looking at handback, let's start with your statutory and mandatories and work backwards, because that's going to be your heavy hitters from a legality point of view and finance, because fire doors aren't cheap, for example. So I do recommend working from your criticals backwards, because then the next thing is mention the variations. One of the key things on variations is they're often not updated on RDSs. So the RDS is out of sequence for the variation, which means it doesn't exist. So it's important that the RDSs are kept up to date or brought up to date as quick as possible, especially as you're heading towards handback, because it documents that change. Even if room 21 is knocked down, you still need an RDS saying knocked down on agreement variation 25, so that every location, every space is documented from day one, what it looked like, to the end of concession, so that you've got that evidence to lock out any issues that will come. And they will come, because there'll be people coming in specifically to map this together. The same with drawings. There's often clauses in a lot of the contracts that as you do a variation, you're supposed to update the drawings. I've never seen anybody in 30 years ever update the drawings. And often because they never had any drawings as built. And I think, George, you brought up that before about the clauses around people not signing off as built.
Well, very much so. And in fact, I think that's probably a worse problem than it was 5 years ago.
Yeah. Because
of the new regulations, people are reluctant to sign to say that that it is an as-built drawing, even though in the legislation it says that you've got to provide an as-built drawing.
Yeah.
Yes, Pierre.
George, I think one of the things is that I'm seeing the small subcontractors as a potential issue here, is that they don't have capacity and they don't have competence to do the records, Matt, that you're talking about. And the building regs have changed now to include, before it gets closed up, that there's a record. I still don't understand whether or not there's a CDE where that data is being stored. But it comes back, Matt, to we've got a series of changes that have taken place over a lifetime of the building. And it really is, in my mind, things like RDSs, is that we start with a big pile of rooms, spaces that we put together. And as that develops through time, on a database, you need to actually be able to keep track of it much the same way that that particular space has been removed, that it still retains a record in the database. And I think this is where the AI, coming back to your document that you were talking about, is that you've got the contract, and then there's been amendments or additional documents, and using the AI to say, these are the gaps between that. So it's a gap analysis kind of step, which really picks up the key exceptions. And those are the ones that aren't the bedtime reading, because they actually will have a lot of in and out things that are going to happen. So I think that's the sanity, to actually really try and keep it as simple as possible. What are the things that have priority, severity, impact on these things? Thank you.
Could I just say, Pierre, that one of the things I think that we need to just clarify is the term AI, because I think that the way we're looking at it is there's an overall thing called data engineering, and AI is one component in that. So, for example, what you were talking about just now in terms of being able to do comparisons, most of that you should be able to do that using data engineering, and actually using AI models to do it is probably it's going to be very expensive, and you're using AI to do relatively simple calculations. And if we can get more standardization in the way things are described, and as Hamza was saying there, using Uniclass properly, fully, and also being able to relate that to things like NRM, which is it's a different way of classifying information, largely on work instructions. If we can get all of that working together, then it means that we can actually use traditional computing to do it, rather than have to rely on the large language models.
So George, a quick one will go to the IDS, the Information Delivery Specification. That is essentially, when I say about the AI, I'm simply talking about a methodology that goes and unpicks it, finds the exceptions, and then those can be put into a rule-based thing, which is populated. And that's the idea, is to have a set of rules that very quickly can say, here's the funnel, you throw a whole lot of stuff in and you get the essence coming out. Those are the things that become critical. Get those sorted out. The other things are minor, or they're of less value. My one concern was about the functional facility, is that when these things get handed over, as a taxpayer, I don't want to pay for having to reinstate it so it can become functional again. Not when some other buggers actually made money out of it. Sorry, I'm just a rat.
Agreed.
Caroline?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I just wanted to take one back, so away from the AI, just a scenario that we have. So I used to be in education, and things were pretty straightforward in education. A school is a school, you know, and not much changes as built. But coming to healthcare now, the one thing that I've noticed is that we are obviously I'm on the FA provider side, but then the SPV we found, they will have certain areas that they keep, and they will sublet. And when they sign that contract, we have no visibility of that contract. Okay, so they do it, and then the people there will change the rooms, so that when it went out from us, it was a consulting room that we knew was a consulting room that probably just only had the asset of an aircon in it. But when they sublet that, the people that are coming in will do whatever they need to do to convert it. Then they leave. So this has happened. Then they leave and it comes back to us. There's no formal handover. And when it comes back to us, it's now different from when it went out. We are not provided with drawings. So there is no update of what is that room now? What is it? What's the drawing in it? But then they say, go and find the assets in there and add as a variation. So that's the other part of it that also is a bit of a in the mud, I can say, as far as what we are going to hand over or handing back to the client at the moment. So that's why asset capture has just been a continuous, I don't know, mess, to put it lightly.
Yeah, I mean, my argument on that would say review the contract relating to dilapidations, because if it's the SPV that's took that on and changed it, they should notify you those changes, because you're not managing or creating those changes, they have.
Yeah.
So your documentation is still the original RDS because you never altered it.
Mm.
So that's why I would say that they have to notify you of those changes because they implemented them, including in FM uplifts for the maintenance and probably energy as well, because if you've got pain and gain on your energy, then they should notify you of any energy usage that's outside the original contract. So it is a contract thing, that, rather than just accepting it because the room has been altered outside of your control. They should either put it back the way it was, which is what you'd expect on a retail unit. You've got to rip everything out, even if it looks nice, or get billed for it. Because in my view, they're probably billing the tenant that's left for the delapse for not doing it. So they've probably already been paid, then just giving you it back. Well, you can look at your RDS and go, right, this is changed. Have you accepted these changes? Bill them for that, and then take it on as a variation. But the problem you've got, if you've not maintained the equipment in there, I probably wouldn't take the equipment on unless they've got evidence that's been looked after, because you're taking on a liability. So that's how I deal with that situation. I'll quite simply say it's out of scope.
Yeah. Okay.
Unless anybody disagrees.
Unfortunately, Matt, the problem is that the people that make the decisions at the top are seeing the bottom pound sign. So us, the operational side of things, the understanding, should I say, I'll use the word understanding, is pretty different of what we're doing on the ground versus what they agreed up there, sitting in a nice aircon room.
Yeah, it gets back to the handback scenario where the money's taken out early, and then everyone else has to deal with the problems trying to get it to the end of the contract without losing any money. So it's all part and parcel of the same thing. It is an understanding, because a lot of people don't really understand the life cycle. If you're finance, you're not driven in the same way as somebody trying to manage the buildings or manage the budgets for the long-term modelling. The focus is profit, because commercially they're driven for profit. But that's what they're employed for, and that's partly where they have to start aligning towards the end of the contract or face the penalties that come with not managing it properly. But unfortunately, it's a case of just trying to work it contractually, that if they've signed up and agreed that we take it on as it is, there's been a transaction. Well, some of that transaction should have gone to your team to actually validate it, inspect it, test it, and update the drawings if they haven't provided them.
I think the interesting thing is that there's normally a provision within any contract for keeping the information up to date, but it's not really very well managed, and it's lost. So, for example, as Active Plan, we work with people like Equans and Sodexo, and we provide them with a service that relates to a variation. So in other words, when Equans are carrying out work, they're probably not actually carrying out the work. They will be contracting it to a specialist to complete that work. And as part of that specialist's responsibility, the updating of any records like the room data sheets and the drawings should be being done by that specialist contractor. But as Pierre was saying, they probably don't have the expertise and the competence to do it. So the process that we've established, which we've been doing now for about 6 or 7 years with Equans, is that when they let the contract, they allow in that contract £200 or £300 or whatever for just doing the admin work, which includes updating the drawings, and that means it gets done. So either the subcontractor pays or they pay and it's deducted. But the point is that if they didn't do that, then if they end up not doing it, then in 3 years' time, 5 years' time, that Equans have got to pay, which seems mad. And I think it's an administration thing rather than necessarily a contractual thing. Anne, do you mind if I just ask you, as obviously an SPV, what's your role within Resilius? What do you do?
I'm an assistant lifecycle manager, so we have like a dedicated asset services team. So we do lifecycle management, the planning, and also handbacks for a couple of projects that are obviously at that point.
So you're working across quite a few of your facilities, are you?
Yeah, but just generally asset services, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. So from what we've just been saying here, is there anything that you would like the community to help with at all? Are there any things that you would like us to are the points that have been made useful to you, like standardization and the like?
Yeah, definitely, because I think what I find with our projects, because we're working with different FM providers and different, obviously, local authorities with different expectations, and obviously some of the older PFIs will have lots of history and things like that. It can be really hard to manage different people's expectations of the standard of service, the documentation, and things like that. And I think Hamza will relate to this because we've worked on the same project with a difficult local authority and things like that. getting that sort of document package for things to be signed off, paid, and it keeps everybody happy, doesn't it, if you're all on the same page and you know what to expect. So yeah, I think it's definitely worthwhile. And I think for the SPV as well, when it does come to the handback, if you do it now and get the process right now, or whatever stage you're at, when it does come to handback, you know, it's done then, isn't it? You don't have to restart an entire exercise, you know, a couple of years before handback. It's already in place then. It's less work to do, really, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. And it also means that it's then easier once you get that initial baseline right, albeit it's probably a significant piece of work to do at one point, then you've got something that you can then keep up to date going forward if you've got the right process in place. And as I say, if it can be built into the normal process for project delivery, that the records are updated as well, that can be a nominal cost. And as Caroline was saying, one of the big challenges, I think, is that there's a huge amount of knowledge in the local team that gets lost when that person leaves or retires.
Yeah, absolutely. I find that joining other projects when I was on the FM side, if I joined and thought, trying to get used to what the assets are, what's gone on, trying to pick up variations or whatever it is, sometimes you're just somebody like the caretaker will tell you, oh, we did that years ago, or we, you know, that got changed, or we changed that color, and somebody picked that, you know, 5 years ago, and you think, I don't know how I'm meant to actually cost anything properly without talking to everybody that's ever worked on this project, you know. So it just makes everybody's life a bit easier.
Absolutely. Okay. What you just said there is interesting, because that sparked a conversation that we had a couple of weeks ago, because we were talking to a caretaker or somebody that was working with a caretaker in a school, and they were talking about the handover information and reviewing all the asset taxonomies and standards that were coming over. And somebody said to him, is this providing you with the information that you need? And he said, no. But he'd not spoken up because he was in a room of senior people, including the head teacher and the like. And so what do you need? He said, well, for example, that schedule of paint, it talks about duck egg blue. Yeah. He said, I need the RAL number. Yeah. Because just having a description. And since then, I've been asking people that are involved in handovers of schools, for example, if they are actually providing the detailed information in terms of what each wall was used on. And it's actually far less clear than I would hope. You know, you've got an MBS specification with something that says it's white.
Yeah.
But as I understand it, there's lots of different whites.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Well, we used to just sometimes ask the contractor, what did you use last year? Oh yeah, just go with that, or check their quote from last year. And or they'd almost be dictating to us what color they're using, because we didn't know or didn't have it written down. Again, if you're new and you come in and you don't have that information on record.
Exactly. And as far as schools are concerned, there are hundreds of schools being delivered, you know, at the moment, in fact, thousands, where they're not on PFIs, or maybe some of them are. In fact, some of them are. Some of them are PPPs. We're working on 7 or 8 in Ireland at the moment. They're all PPPs. And that's something we're always thinking about asset information as in like M&E and fire safety and things like that. But paint is a big part of what a caretaker does, apparently. Yeah. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I'd say the other thing on that is also the same with flooring, because one of the big problems you have is a lot of cleaning contractors have the wrong equipment for the new floors, so they destroy them. So you often, you know, they've got the wrong buffing machines, or they shouldn't be buffing it, or they've got the wrong carpet cleaners for that type of carpet. it is quite common to see a lot of floors damaged by the wrong equipment. And it's because of the disconnect between the cleaning contractors often and the FM side for the hard services that may be responsible for the building. So though there's an O&M handover, in theory, a lot of the time it doesn't go to the cleaners, but also contractually, are they going to change all their flooring equipment that costs tens of thousands of pounds because you've changed your floors?
Matt,
Absolutely.
if I can just come in here, I think something that's really important is the maintenance program is part of that same thing that George is talking about, the caretaker's requirements. In other words, who's got what needs in order to maintain this functional facility? And that should be embedded in the rooms, in the various spaces, the spatial aspect. And George, we had that session the last time where we spoke about how do you identify the wall that may have that particular paint applied, and the room might have, if it has 4 walls, might have 4 different paints that have been applied. And all of those are just data-driven things which can be managed without too much hassle at all. It's just saying, here's 4, how do we measure it from when you walk in, you go clockwise, and you number the room's walls around that. Just different definitions of how you actually manage it. And that becomes the consistent part, that it's cohesive across all of the buildings, whoever puts it together. You go in, you do this, clockwise, done. No other method is required. And there's a little instruction says, do this if you're that person being appointed. Just my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're right with that. But what we've also got to recognise is that the vast amount of the stock is existing. So we've certainly got to get it right going forward, and that's part of what we're trying to do with the schools group. We've got a specialist schools group, by the way, that is a work stream. So that's task and finish that we're working on. So if you're interested in that area of schools, put schools in the chat, and we can include you in the next follow-up meeting on that, because we're not specifically focusing just on schools. What we're trying to do is get the schools thing right so that we can then feed that back into other types of buildings. So, prisons and things like that. Good. Okay. Paul McLaughlin from Multivista. I think you're doing work as well on some existing buildings, I think you've said.
We are certainly having discussions with some people on existing buildings. So we're working a lot with the built environment to digitise estates. Various different ways that we can go around this. So we are doing a lot of point cloud surveys and then creating or providing accurate plans and creating BIM models as a starter for 10 for all the asset information for this handback process. It is very much in its infancy. There's a lot of challenges over access, especially with hospital facilities and things like that, and the cost is quite prohibitive. But following our conversation yesterday, George, I think there's certainly a bit of mileage to reduce that scope and maybe not go down the road of point cloud surveys, but maybe go down the road of 360 pictures and maybe utilising some of the good work that you guys are already doing at Active Plan. So really, it's been an interesting call for me. It's not primarily the mainstay of our business, but it's something that we're getting asked a lot on. The mainstay of our business is recording construction documentation and variations and things like that from a visible or a visual perspective is the mainstay of us. So obviously it does have many applications in the built environment, and especially for a PPP estate and PFI handbacks and things like that as well. So it's just very good knowledge. I'm just sitting back, knowledge gathering here, to be honest. But we are doing a bit, and we are discussing with a lot of people there, and we do have various different systems in play that can be adapted, but are not necessarily designed for this purpose.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah.
George, a quick one is there's an application, an AI application. If I can share it on the screen very quickly, it's a thing called Amplify, and it scans a PDF file and converts it into an IFC and a Revit model. So I've pulled some of these apart from a quality point of view. And in 45 seconds, you get a comprehensive floor plan, which if you have no single plan, you now suddenly have a model. And if you go back and have a look at it, it's actually quite, the integrity is good enough to be able to start working from. And I think that's the kind of identification maybe as what tools could actually help doing these things very quickly. In other words, kicking it off from nothing to something in very short order.
Yeah, we've experimented with Amplify, and it's quite good, but it also gets some things wrong, like doors and things like that. So you've got to be able to. It needs to be done by somebody that knows what they're doing, like you, Pierre. It's not something that we can we can completely rely on. But I agree, these productivity tools are absolutely critical. I think there are some really good things coming through.
Yeah, George, I think it's mainly getting something on a model or on paper, off paper, into something that you can actually use quickly and apply the classifications as an example, SSEF and PR very, very quickly, because it can be swapped out. So that's the sanity part about it, is using it as a placeholder, and it kicks it off quite nicely with that. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah. So if we've got people that are on the call that are interested in taking O&M information, as Pierre's just saying there, and turning it into intelligent data, then we've got another work stream that's actually looking at that at the moment. So if you put O&M into the chat, then we can include you in those conversations. We're just at the 12 o'clock limit. I hope you found it useful. I'd just like to ask a question as to whether the impact of the Building Safety Act and the fire safety orders are exposing some work that needs to be done as far as your PFI contracts are concerned. I suppose that would be Hamza, Anne, Caroline, Matt. Is that are those becoming, Anne, in your case, are those becoming relevant as far as, are you being asked for that?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question?
Sorry, it was a rambling question. I apologize. So with the new regulations, or rather more importantly, the clear enforcement of the regulations, things like being able to understand where all your compartments are and making sure that all the assets that are protecting those compartments and the other systems like smoke control and things like that, all of those need to be evidenced in a way that is rigorous. So I just wondered whether that is something that additionally is coming on your radar at all.
Yeah, so I think we've had to kind of change our approach into how we make sure we keep those records and keep them up to date and make sure we've got everything that we need. So we've had to change our process internally so that when it does come to life cycle or variations and things like that, those are something we always get off the FM provider every single time that there's a job done or any sort of upgrade, anything like that. And obviously like audits and things like that. But it's definitely something I think in the last year. So we've definitely had to change our approach internally just to make sure that we don't miss these things, because it's ultimately our responsibility, isn't it? Despite passing the maintenance on, just to make sure we've got everything that we need as the building owner.
Yes, and I think that's an interesting point, and that is that under the legislation, the responsible person, whatever that means, has to provide people that are carrying out works. Let's say, for example, you're asking a next company to come and do fire doors, for example. It's legally your responsibility, I think, or it could be the FM's responsibility, I'm not sure which, to ensure that Nick's company gets all the information that they need to carry out that work properly. And also, if you identify that there are things that need replacing, that would or may need, depends on the type of building, but it may need to go back through the regulator to be able to say we're either repairing or we're replacing these doors. So I'm just wondering, I don't think it's that clear to FMs as to whether they are liable or not. And I think it's something that, so I'm interested to just understand. I think there may be different people in the organisation that would be dealing with that. Matt.
Yeah, to be fair, I've seen it with CDM, trying to get the CDM principles over. That's difficult enough. So for them to be fully understanding who's responsible it's a trick question. A lot of people simply don't know, especially when you start getting into the contracts and the complexities, or like, for example, PPP, where you have say 40% ownership with government bodies. So who's responsible for it? Are they 40% responsible? The contracts can be quite complex, and it's that obscurity that confuses people, which also gives them a bit of a safety net of falling into grey areas of not knowing. So it's also a difficult one to put on the radar because nobody wants to talk about it either. Because when you start going, well, who is responsible for doing this, and nobody wants to own it. I've had it with buildings. They go, right, we manage the buildings, it's our buildings. And I go, okay, so who arranges access? And they go, well, the healthcare do. It says, so you've got no control over the building? No, so it's not your building in that sense then, because you're not actually. So who is then controlling, say, for example, the DBSs? Who's the custodian of making sure the building's safe for who's entering the building? Do you see how it goes off and grows legs in different directions? It's a difficult path. So when you start getting down to the compartmentation, the regulation 38, etc., there's so many nuances, and nobody really wants to sit down and actually say we own this or we don't own it. It's normally a case of let's not talk about it too much.
That's a very interesting point.
Yeah, if it's all right for me to jump in, yeah, we had a very similar situation with like fire risk assessments and things like that. But I suppose with the PFI buildings, it was kind of like there is no one responsible person. Obviously, the school is responsible for certain parts of the building. You know, previously FM would just say, well, we do the FM areas, we do the caretaker's office, we do that, you know, we'll do our own fire risk assessment, you do yours. But there was no sort of interface between the two. So I think for those sorts of things, that's when you do have to work in partnership and work together. And you almost need a bit of a responsibilities matrix to say, yeah, okay, we do these different things. We hold the DBS register, but you can have access to it. You can audit it if you want, all that sort of thing. I think when it comes to so many different stakeholders, that you can't just have one person or one party that's responsible for it all. It doesn't really work that way.
George,
That's very
sorry.
interesting. Yeah, sorry.
Can I come in here? I think, Matt, one of the things here is this is where an interrogation process is required. In other words, it's an action tracker. What is the task? And immediately the processing of the task says, these are the implications, these are the responsibilities, and as you're saying, a responsibility matrix. In other words, it's just connecting who's going to be responsible. And at some point when they change, that entity, there's a process that just says change that entity to another person who's going to be the stakeholder looking after it. But basically it's saying, what am I doing? I'm changing a door. Is the door a fire door? Yes or no? And immediately these are the 5 clauses that are responsible, and making it a checklist on a phone. So it you know, this platform, George, exactly your platform, from putting in a record of something by saying if there's a task and these are the implications. It bridges so many areas where I think there's paperwork on paperwork on paperwork to reduce it into something which is very much like City Mapper organize a bus trip into London, and it says, there you go, and that's the pass. And it can be retrofitted, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'd say there, where it gets obscure is like Caroline was on about, where you've got stakeholders that then turn around and sublet a unit out, that then change the room, which then has different occupancies that then impact the FRA and the EVAC plans. They don't update them. So you may have the overarching responsibility, but you fail because someone else has failed. And that's why you get all these obscurities. So it's good to have a checklist, but the problem you'll have is when people don't fulfill their part of it, it's stuck because it can't move forward because other people are blocking it. It may not be your engagement to actually resolve that. So the subtenant would be under the SPV, not under the FM, but the FM is impacted by the tenant.
Correct.
Yeah. So
sorry, Matt. I was just going to say we predominantly work in the social housing space, and the clear line of responsibility there. The responsible person is the managing director, the CEO, whatever, the head of that organisation. So it's a really clear, and I think that what we've encountered is that some of them aren't really aware of that responsibility that they own. So we have to go in and say, look, you cannot carry on like this, because ultimately, if with the tightened up regulations, you are personally, liably, criminally responsible for this, as is your corporate reputation and all of that stuff. So, but the PPP, it does raise some interesting diversions on who is that responsible person.
Yeah, I think the key to that is you can delegate, but you can't actually. You can outsource it, but you can't delegate. So you can give it to someone else, but you're still responsible. Which is because that's one of the things I use quite commonly when you're doing things like where people outsource their risk assessments and outsource I'm saying, well, when somebody falls or hurts themselves just because you said you thought they were safe, you're still responsible. What deemed them safe? Because they obviously weren't. So you can ask somebody to look at it, but you're still responsible, and that's the bit they often overlook. Like you say, and they assume that I've given that to, say, Gleeds or someone else. It's not my responsibility. And you go, it is. You can't walk away from it.
Okay, so this is actually something that we could give some feedback to the department on, Matt, because I think this lack of clarity is critical.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's the way in which I mean, I was at an event last week. Sorry, we're running over a bit, and if people have got to drop off, then that's fine. But I think it is worth just finishing off on this. I was at an event last week where a law firm was explaining that they've defended a number of different actions against their clients, and they've been able to win because the competence of the legal people that were working on behalf of the department were not really up to scratch, and they'd not actually put their case together very well. And I know this law firm very well, and they're a very good law firm. But I said in the meeting, one of the challenges that you've actually done in raising that is that a lot of the people we speak to, when we're trying to get them to take things seriously and say, you do realize that there's a legal sanction here, they say, yeah, but who's been prosecuted? So therefore, people are not acting in the way that the Dame Judith Hackett and the government is trying to get them to act, because there's no sanction. There is a legal sanction, but you've got lawyers that can apparently get them off it. And you know, that I think that's something that we need to recognise that. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what the answer is to that, but
I think talking to Hackett, George, she said it's only when we hold people up for accountability, and a few of these people do go to jail, that things start to turn around. But yeah, it needs a system where there are people that do go to jail or face heavy sanction for not complying.
Yeah, I mean, there's a project that so I was at this event last week where Dame Judith was talking, and she raised the one, I can't remember the project, but it's in Stoke-on-Trent or somewhere like that, where it's a big I think it's student accommodation.
Student accommodation. It's not been signed off at Gateway 3, isn't it? Yeah.
Now, she actually said that the main reason one reason for that, and I think she was referring to that, I might have this wrong, but what she said was that on that particular one, the pump that was driving the sprinkler system, it could only pump up to floor 13. Yeah, and it's a 20-story building.
Yeah.
And when the person that was responsible for that pump, that sprinkler system was challenged, said, well, I put the spec in that I was given. But they knew full well that it was the wrong one. Now, obviously, from a contractual point of view, they're probably constrained. I don't know, but it's yeah. I think that's the sort of thing. Am I right on that one, Nick?
Yeah, it is. It's a duty of candour, isn't it? You basically need all people to say, even if you've inaccurately specified a pump for this, it's completely unacceptable to walk away and install something that you know isn't going to work properly. So they were right to pick it up at Gateway 3, and I think that a lot of these things are causing the stoppages in the system, but it's because people aren't building things correctly. So you know, swings and roundabouts, isn't it?
Absolutely. Okay, so I hope you feel it's been worthwhile, and we're planning to do another one of these in probably about 4 weeks' time, something like that. So, if you've got colleagues that would be interested in it, please let us know. And if you've got any topics that you want us to specifically cover, I think so as well. Richard, can you just explain what we've got coming up?
Yeah, we've got next week the monthly forum. If anybody hasn't received an invite to that and wants to come along, just put forum in the chat. We've got 4 round tables coming up where we're looking through the guidance we produced on fire critical assets. They're coming up. If anybody's not signed up for those, just put fire critical in the chat and we will get relevant invites out to you for those. So they're the following week, I think.
Brilliant. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for everybody attending, and let's move forward.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very
Take
much.
care.
See you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.